Hi, everyone. I'm very excited to be here today and to present this session on selecting repertoire for your jazz ensemble, particularly your young jazz ensemble. And just to like kind of set this, kind of frame this for you a bit, I'm coming at this kind of from 27 years of middle school experience in the classroom. And some things that I found that work in selecting music, and some things that we all need to keep in mind. And some of this does not just apply to jazz ensemble. A lot of this just applies to our ensembles in a general sense. But we'll also talk specifically about jazz ensemble selection. So one of the most important things is you have to know your ensemble. You really want to make sure that that you understand that you have, everybody's strengths. And if there's shortcomings is probably not the best term to use, but those things that are in development with your players. So we want to make sure that we have an understanding of our range, like ranges, so to speak, what about the approximate grade level of music that everybody's going to be able to handle. No, and again, know your brass ranges. Make sure that you understand. You should be programming things with, with G's and A's if you don't have that in for your lead trumpet player, or same thing with trombones if the notes are going up with F and G, and they can only hit a D or whatever the top note of their range is. We don't want to be overtaxing them, and then there's times we're going to want to push them. But to be successful with the literature selection, we really want to make sure that we're cognizant of those brass ranges. Know the ability and comfort level of all rhythm section players. This is huge. You want to make sure that I know as a middle school director for all those years that I had varying degrees of comfort and ability and knowledge base from my rhythm section players. So much so the fact that, and here's a little bit of a life hack that I was able to incorporate into my jazz ensemble, is that I did not, at the beginning of every year, have full band rehearsals. My group was it was actually not a pull-out, it was an after-school activity. So it wasn't a curricular event, it was extracurricular. And I had just had my rhythm section come first, just so I could assess where everybody was at, and explain their roles to them and those kinds of things. So that's something to think about. But you want to make sure that you want to see if your players are okay with reading alternate notation. Do guitarists understand what slash notation is? Do drummers understand if there's slash notation in the part, what that means? So that's incredibly important. Do your guitar and piano students understand what comping is, which is, that rhythmic accompaniment that happens in the ensemble, often when there's a solo happening, but also sometimes when full passages are happening as well. Do you have players that are able to read chord changes? If you don't, this is really, really important, because you want to make sure that you start drawing connections for those students right away. A lot of publishers have guitar chord sheets now. Those are incredibly helpful for students for chord formation in their left hand. Those are an invaluable resource for teachers as well. So it's just a matter of finding the right spot on the fretboard where that's all going to work. Those chord configurations. So that's really, really helpful. If you have a piano player that reads chord changes, that's amazing at a young level. So you want to be able to capitalize on that. Same thing with basses. But at a lot of times we don't have those coming in, especially at the beginning level. So understanding that who can do this and who's able to decode chords and who isn't, that's incredibly important as you're selecting music. Bass, you want to understand if you are somebody who is drawing from your school's orchestra program for that bass chair and the jazz ensemble, you want to, and if you're not an orchestra director, you want to understand that they have to play in half position to be able to play in band keys, especially the B flat, E flat, F that we all see, key areas that we all seem to live in at the beginning of in beginning level literature. So the half position in the bass is not introduced until halfway through the second classroom method book of basses. So that's something that you want to understand, and you may need to address and just show your bassists that they need to move their hand back into half position, and maybe label some of the music as well to get them going. For drums, you want to make sure that students have well, that they can use all appendages, right? And I know in my classroom, I did not always, drum set was not a part of the curriculum, obviously, in the band world. So when it was time for jazz band, we wanted to make sure that everybody could, use all appendages, keep a groove going, keep a nice steady beat. But we also want to make sure that they understand basic drum set notation, stems meaning hands, and stems up meaning hands, stems down meaning feet. So we want to make sure that students have a great have a working understanding of that as well. And also have a gauge on who may be your soloist in the group as you're selecting things. Know who's interested in improvising and soloing, and if there's no one that's interested in improvising or soloing, then that's also going to affect your literature selection, and it's also going to affect your instruction too, because you're going to want to get students improvising. Personalize your criteria for the literature selection. This is something that when you're looking at music, you kind of want to know your ensemble, and then you're going to want to personalize that. And what I mean by that is you want to keep the strengths of the ensemble in mind. So those things that when I got a lead trumpet player that can really, really play above the staff, or I've got a hotshot saxophone player, I've got a really good guitar player, whatever that is, or multiple things, or you want to keep that in mind when you're picking the literature. You want to pick arrangements that are engaging and fun to play. One of the things that again, I'm going back to I don't mean to say me and I all the time, but I'm going back to the experiences that I had, and making tunes engaging and fun makes students want to be there. So even if it's kind of on how you sell it, if you're not going to really like the tune, the students are going to pick up on that. So make sure that you're picking tunes that you feel are engaging and fun to play, and that you're buying into, so that the students buy into it. It's all about your teaching style. This is a huge thing, making connections with jazz history and jazz music itself. Students do not have that we have all this information in the palm of our hands all the time on our devices, but we need to help make those connections for students. So if you're doing a tune that's in a swing style, and there's a lot of block writing or call and response writing, which we'll get into in just a second, we want to make sure that we're making those connections with the students. Play some count basie for that. Whatever the style of that chart is, we need to draw from jazz history and help students make those connections. Even go ahead and play videos. There's a lot of great videos now that we can just dial up and play for students. That's a great way to show instrument technique, especially for young rhythm section players too. So making those connections with jazz history is important when you're thinking of picking out music. Begin with the end in mind, and this is great for any ensemble that you may direct. Start the beginning of the year with the end in mind, as far as where you want to be with each group. I would like to be able to do this type of piece with the group, or this specific piece with the group. So kind of know, okay, that's where I want to end the year. How am I going to get there? So scaffold the charts. So you want to make sure that you're starting with things that really are, like we said, engaging and fun to play, but there are things that the students can kind of sink their teeth into and really come away with confidence, is what I'm trying to say. We want to build their confidence immediately from the get-go. So making sure that we pick easy arrangements to start with, and then again, build confidence by starting with very easy selections that use block scoring and call and response, especially the very youngest of students. We want them to be able to decode not only the notes and the rhythms, but the importance of all the articulations that are written in the music. So we want to make sure that we start with tunes that are moving in the block. And when I say block voicings, I mean that everybody, like everybody in a section, is playing the same thing. So it's like that 4 or 5 part chordal writing that happens. Sometimes it's full ensemble, sometimes it's just one section, or 2 sections playing in the block and others playing, but that's really, really important. Call and response is also great for building those oral skills that are needed in jazz. Don't be afraid to change direction. This is really important. If a chart's not working, it's not working. And that doesn't mean that the chart is bad, the arrangement's bad. It doesn't mean that your students are not handling it. It just means it's not right in that particular time. I had a group right about 4 or 5 years ago, and I thought they were going to be able to play this chart right, like shortly out of the gate, and they weren't. It was a little bit too independent, even though there was a lot of block writing. And then we did cross that bridge with the chart later on in the year, and they were able to play it. But don't be afraid to just to change gears on it. It's okay. And then have backup charts in case that happens. So we want to make sure that, if you're going to be, we always want to have different styles, right? So if we have a swing tune and an even eighth note tune or two, have something that's that same style, but it's a backup in case something doesn't work out. So here's some characteristics of quality beginning and young jazz ensemble charts. Okay, they are easy to read. Most publishers now, it's incredibly easy to read. Sometimes if somebody, if you have a friend or somebody that gives you something, make sure it's easy to read before you put it out there in front of your students. We want to make sure that we're setting them up right from the get-go with a great product and a readable product. Articulations are clear and consistent. Make sure that they are very, very clear. Sometimes, if it's a small, I don't want to say smaller publisher, but sometimes when we write things ourselves, or if we are getting things from somebody that's maybe not published, make sure that it's consistent with the articulations. It's just going to build way more confidence, and it's going to also be easier to teach. This is really, really important. There are repetitious elements to the chart, especially at the very, very beginning level, okay? This is going to build confidence. This can be repetitious melodies, like I said, call and response type stuff, or just the figures are just repetitious. The rhythm section parts are often overwritten, and we're actually going to look at that in just a few moments. So we want to make sure that it is repetitious, because that builds confidence with students, and then you can get to the more complex literature as you go along and start, like again, I said, scaffolding that literature and introducing things that are a little bit more difficult over time. But we really want to build confidence, and that repetitious key does it. There are room for solos and guide solos in the printed music. Most publishers, this is a standard thing. That's always a great springboard for kids to get started in improvisation, and having those present. If the student really doesn't want to start improvising right away, those guide solos are just a great, like I said, springboard into the land of improvisation. The improvisation sections, I have found the most successful groups that I've had at the beginning of the year, and actually throughout the year at the middle school level, have limited harmonic palettes. And what I mean by that is like there can be it's either like a 1 chord or a 2 chord kind of pattern, something that's almost besides the blues where the chord changes move around, the limited harmonic palettes, or the chord structures, or it's something that has a lot of chords to it, but one scale works over it. Or 1 or 2 scales over it. So improvisation sections that have limited harmonic palettes are a great way to start fostering confidence in young musicians. The rhythm section parts are carefully notated, and I'm not saying any one person's name, because I'm kind of guilty of this too as a writer. But every once in a while, I come across something that's not, shall we say, kid friendly. There's too many notes in the piano part, the drum part's hard to read, the bass part goes all over the range of the instrument. There's a lot of shifting involved for the bass or whatever, or there might be too much happening in the guitar part. We've all seen those arrangements. So just making sure that the arrangements are carefully notated, especially at the beginning of the year where we're trying to get the ensemble off to a great start. And again, fostering that confidence. So we want to make sure that those parts are carefully notated. And by that, I mean the guitars have limited technical demands. Most times in grade 1 charts, you're only going to see like slash notation and rhythmic notation in the guitar parts. And that's fine. And then as we get into grade 2 and grade 3 music, you're going to start to see melodic material show up in addition to the slash and rhythmic notation. Piano voicings are age level appropriate. just because everybody has 5 fingers on each hand doesn't mean we have to have 10 notes happening in a piano part. And I see that sometimes in really young literature from different places, and I'm like, that's not real kid friendly. So, and then that takes time from the director, because then at that point you need to say, okay, well, we need to like pare this down, and because oftentimes kids are not going to be able to handle that. So we want to make sure that and I'm going to show you an example of this where it's the right notes, or I call, as a writer, I call it the money notes. Like we want to make sure that all those notes are hitting in the chords, and it's something that's playable and it's going to be doable by younger musicians and smaller hands. Baseline figures are repetitious and attainable, and often I see bass lines that get reinvented every chorus of the tune or every section of the tune. And to me, as a educator and a writer, if that bass part and the drum part aren't happening together, especially, like I call it bass and drum hand time alignment. We want to make sure that the appendages on your drummer's hands and your bass player's hands are in alignment. So the more repetitious and those bass lines are, the more confidence we're building in that team of the bass player and the drummer. And that's just going to exude more energy in your ensemble. Whereas if we're fighting for those bass lines, then that can become an issue. So look for repetitious bass lines. And then the drum parts are easy to decode and to read, or at least explain if there's some things going on. I know with Alfred, when it's an ensemble hit, it's an accent above the staff on that cymbal part. Different publishers do different things, but it has to be easy to decode and to read for students. Okay, let's take a look at some examples of this. This is, if you're not hip to the writing of Terry White, Terry writes for Alfred and some other publishers, and Hal Leonard, and he has, I believe he has some things through Excelsior too. Terry is a wonderful writer, understands the limitations of young musicians, but is able to make them sound hip. And this is one of his new charts that have come out this year. And this will be, if it's not already in MakeMusic Cloud, it will be very shortly. And this is a Wes Montgomery tune. It's a blues, but let's take a look at this guitar part. So you can kind of see that it's a mix of what I said earlier. It's a mix of rhythmic notation and slash notation. This is really just straight ahead ensemble writing, straight ahead guitar writing. Now you'll notice that there are some articulations in the guitar part. He's asking for certain notes to be played short. He's asking for certain notes to be played long. So that's very typical of any level of writing a jazz ensemble. We have to be aware of the articulations. And the chords are very well cleanly notated. This tune is just a blues, like I said, but there are some alterations of it. But you can kind of see like that it's a mix of these different things. I was going to say something else about that, and I'm just going to move on. I can't remember what I was going to say. I lost my train of thought on that. Here's a piano part for that same tune, and you can see the piano voicings. This is right in the wheelhouse. In that beginning jazz ensemble. And that's why one of the reasons I picked this example. You can see that we have right away in the piano part, it's the money note. So if you look at the second chord, it's an A flat 13 chord, and right away he's just got 2 notes happening in the left hand, 2 notes happening in the right hand, and he's got all the right notes happening. The left hand's got the 7th and the 3rd. The right hand has the 13 and the root. Bam, that's all you need, right? You've got that tonality is happening. So the way Terry has this whole chart laid out is that way, but that's really, really important. You can see that the chords are cued here because that's important. If student understands how to go ahead and comp at this age level, those chords are there, and if not, this is a learning experience for as students are learning their part on this. They can see how the chords are constructed in the part. And here's the second half of that. You can see it's also very repetitious. The solo section there at 57 is a great way, is a great section to start teaching comping. He has he's got whole notes and dotted half notes with some anticipations in there. That's a great way to just teach your students how to start comping right away, because he's got very simple voicings printed there, and he's got longer note values, which lend themselves to, when we see that, to go ahead and teach students to start comping. So that's a great resource for your students here. This chart. This is very, very playable. The baseline on this one is quite repetitious. He does use some variations on it. If you look at 33, and then you go ahead and you look at actually, if we look at 45 and 57, those sections are very, very similar. And again, that's to build confidence. And those are the kind of things that we are looking for in young jazz ensemble charts. This really does build confidence in students. And let's take a look at the drum part. So again, stems up are the hands, stems down are our feet. This is pretty straightforward. When you see, like, this is an Alfred chart. So when you see Bellwin jazz chart through Alfred, so as you see the accents on cymbals, those are crash cymbal hits. So we want to make sure that the drummers are hitting those as well. But you can see that this is pretty clearly notated, and that we've got quite a bit going on there in the chart itself. But when we get to the second page, where it's just basically just grooving, we have those one measure repeat signs, and that's important. We're just keeping that groove happening. So that's a pretty clearly notated chart. So that's a great example of a young rhythm section parts. That's The Thumb by Terry White, the West Montgomery tune coming out this year through Alfred. So when we start looking at our evaluation of charts, I always, since I had an extracurricular group, I would give the students about 2 or 3 rehearsals. And I would see, and I'd kind of like, just kind of hourly evaluate what's going on. Are they really picking up on this? And again, this doesn't mean that if it's not happening, that it's a bad thing about your students, or it's a bad thing about the arrangement. It's just not in that point in time in the best interest to do it, right? So you have to ask. This is the evaluation of your lit flow chart. Is it working? Yes. Great. Keep on, plug away, get the I's dotted and the T's crossed, make the details happen in the music, get your kids excited about it, get the improvisation happening if it's needed. And then if it's not, you have to kind of figure out why this is happening. And there's a couple different things that we're going to look at here on the why it might not happen. And one of the reasons it might not happen is you might have some big picture issues in the chart. This could include for instance, like I said, it might be that the bass player and the drummer are just not happening. They just can't sink their teeth into it, or they can't get that time alignment happening. It doesn't mean that it's not going to happen. It just may mean that they need some time to live with that particular selection to make it happen. Another bigger picture issue is maybe it's, from a technical standpoint, maybe the band's not ready for that at that point in time yet. So we want to make sure that. And another issue is students might not be buying into the chart. That is a reason too. So we want to make sure. This is another reason to have backup charts as well. They may not be buying in. It may be too difficult for too many players or key players at that moment in time. So we want to make sure, like I said, I alluded to the bass drum issue. I mean, if they might just need some time to live with it, and there's nothing wrong with that. So we want to give them that time. Or we might have a key player. Maybe that's a solo feature for somebody and they're just not ready for it. That's kind of a big picture issue. And we might want to table that chart for a little while until things can be mastered at a little bit more comfortable level. There are smaller issues. These can often be solved. It may be, if somebody can't play something because of, maybe a range issue. It may be or a little technical issue. It may be just a matter of swapping parts around in a section, and the band would be able to play it. It might be that the piano part is too difficult, like we talked about earlier. There may be too many notes and voiced out, and it might be a problem for your players. That might be a way, a point in time where you might just have to simplify the part to make that work for students. So if it's something that you can kind of massage and make it a little bit better, that may not be worth scrapping the chart over. But if it's a big picture issue, like I said, alluded to time issues or technical issues, then it may be in your best interest to kind of table that chart for a little bit. Okay, so some composers and arrangers of quality and beginning young jazz ensemble literature. I'm going to go through and talk. This is by no means the end all. This is just writers who I feel capture the spirit of the charts in a manner in which young students can kind of gear into it, or if students with not as much experience in jazz can handle it. Dean Sorensen, of course, has had such great success with Chose music over the years, and several different ensemble method books, and just a wonderful series of charts. I've had the good fortune of writing some material for his series back in the day, and he gets it, and he understands how to write for young musicians. The harmony is right. The solo sections are limited harmonic palettes. It's very, very accessible. Terry White, again, I showed you an example of Terry's. I've been using Terry's writing for years in my programs, and just very, very spot on for young musicians, as evidenced in that example that I showed you in the rhythm section. This is one, don't sleep on Carl Stroman. Carl is known as a band writer and a string writer too, but he's done a tremendous amount over the years of young jazz ensemble music that lays perfectly for young musicians. Check out the Blues March that's published by Alfred. It's an amazing little blues. It's not Benny Golson's Blues March, if the Jazz Messengers, if you're hip to that tune, but this is it's a little trumpet section thing. Great writing. He's got a plethora of charts. That's just the first one that comes to mind. Mike Dana is a retired jazz educator. Actually, he's still out there doing it. A great guitarist and educator. He's retired from Fresno City College, but he's just an amazing young jazz ensemble writer. Writes on all grade levels, but he writes with such a hip harmonic. I would not consider Mike's writing beginning level. I would consider it for the young level, but he is he makes young musicians sound very, very mature. Peter Blair is a great writer who has a plethora of wonderful arrangements and originals that are out there, and he really understands how to make an ensemble sound good. Again, those money notes, like making the chords just sound great. He's an outstanding writer. Doug Beach is one of the deans of writing for young musicians. He, again, has that ability to put it all in everybody's wheelhouse, make it sound great. It's cleanly articulated. It's well voiced, just great. And all these writers are here on MakeMusic Cloud, and their material is here. So, and we're going to share some playlists here. I believe it's actually in, you may have it already, but we're going to talk about that playlist in a minute. Mark Taylor is often thought of on the higher end of things as far as a jazz writer goes, but he does have some incredible young jazz ensemble arrangements, beginning jazz ensemble arrangements. Check out his Blues and Haas's Flat from the Count Basie band. He's done such a great job with that. We're going to actually talk about some go-to charts here in just a few minutes. Rick Stitzel is another one. He and Mike Steinell have quite a bit out through Hal Leonard, and they have a great handle on the young musician. And again, it's all about the voicings for me as a writer, and these guys both nail it, and they have such a great understanding of how to write for young musicians. So does Paul Baker. Paul writes for Alfred and also owns Baker's Jazz and More. He has a wonderful knack of writing for young musicians. I wouldn't consider Paul's writing beginning level. I would consider it the young level, but he just awesome writing. Greg Yazanitsky, a wonderful saxophonist from Washington State. And just Greg is a good friend, and he has just that knack, again, making whatever level he's writing for sound like just hip is all get out, and he's great. Paul Murtha is another one. Paul has that ability to make sure that he's got everything covered. Same thing with Zach Smith. Zach's writing is right in the wheelhouse. His first year's charts with Alfred are spot on. Rick Hirsch, again, another writer who's just his young ensemble stuff is just right in that wheelhouse of the first year series for Alfred. Chris Berg is another one. His green cover stuff through Alfred and some of the stuff that he's writing, his compositions that he's writing for Excelsior right now are just outstanding. Michelle Fernandez is another one. She's writing for Hal Leonard and for Excelsior. Check out her writing. Very, very hip, very well notated, very precise, but also very playable and very, very fun. Peter Sayano is another one. He's very, very hip, well thought out, very well orchestrated. So those are some of my favorite go-to writers. Here's some of my favorite go-to charts. And this, I'm breaking this down for beginning groups, and I'm talking beginning of the year and like second half of the year. So some of my favorite beginning of the year swing charts are Rick Stitzel's C-Jam Blues. Centerpiece, it's an old Harry Sweets Edison blues tune. Harry Sweets Edison is probably most famous for being on a ton of the Frank Sinatra recordings in the 1960s, but he's sideman with Count Basie forever. Great riff-based blues tune, where the riff meaning repetitive melody over and over and over again. Rick Stitzel's Monkey See, Monkey Do is another riff-based tune that's very accessible. So is Avenue Swing by Mike Collins Dowden. Flat Tire Shuffle by Dean Sorensen is also very doable and very much in that wheelhouse. And it's also a flex title if you have instrumentation concerns. By the way, a lot of these grade 1 arrangements have color parts. So if you are somebody who's trying to be inclusive and have as many people playing in the ensemble as possible, these charts work with color instruments as well. Paul Murtha's chart on Blue Train was one of my staples in my program, just because it got the kids playing something by John Coltrane first off, and it's a very riff oriented blues, very simple 5-note motif all the time that gets repeated, and kids love it. Roy Philippe's arrangement of Splanky puts the tune in a playable key. It's in E flat instead of D flat, and it's right in that wheelhouse of first year jazz ensemble students. And Rick Stitzel's chart on Blues and Haas Flat is another one. Greg Yazanitsky's Absolutely Positively is another riff-based blues that's through Kendor, just right in that wheelhouse of like a grade 1, 1.5 for your young musicians. Some even 8th note beginning of the year charts that work very, very well. Listen Here by Eddie Harris, arranged by Victor Lopez. Everybody has the same printed solo on that one. And that's a good one to get everybody improvising on, and it works with one, even though there's 2 chords, one scale will work over the whole thing. Funky Monkey by Rick Stitzel is another one, great repetitive tune. Victor's arrangement of Night and Day is done. I seem to remember it's all ensemble, no solos, but it's just a nice one to get everybody playing and counting together as an ensemble, and the rhythm section parts are not that difficult. Peter Blair's Song for Silver is a really playable version of Song for My Father by Horace Silver. Works great. Caravan, John Barry's arrangement of the Duke Ellington Wang Tizol tune is very, very playable by young jazz ensembles. Very well written and that wheelhouse of the first year musician. And Mike Steinell's charts that he wrote to go along with his essential elements jazz method are great. And the Bubbert Goes Retro is kind of like, if you know Lee Morgan's tune, The Sidewinder, it has that kind of boogaloo, it's a blues boogaloo kind of thing, and kids love it. Some of my favorite go-to charts for the second half of the year for beginning students: Rick Stitzel's Burke's Works, My Groove Your Move, rather, the Hank Mobley tune. It's like a minor, 16-bar minor G minor tune. Terry White's arrangement of that great tune. Terry White's arrangement of the Work Song is another playable one as well. Uptown Throwdown by Zach Smith, another great one. Fat Cat by Doug Beach, another chart that's just in that perfect wheelhouse for grade 1, 1.5. Terry White's arrangement of Misty. It's done as like a medium, slow swing tune. Very playable ballad. Finding a good ballad is hard to find for young musicians and making it sound good. Terry knocks it out of the park with this one, and it works at a variety of tempos if you don't want to take it too slow for your students. We'll go back to the tune Blues and Hosses Flat. Rick Stitzel's arrangement is a great arrangement for the beginning of the year. Mark Taylor's arrangement is a great one for second half of the year. Beantown Blues Parade is a second line feel by Rick Hirsch. Great little tune. Mike Story's arrangement of 5-Spot After Dark. It's a minor blues by Benny Golson. Great. One Cool Morning by Dean Sorensen. Another one that lays right in the pocket. Freddie Freeloader, Michael Sweeney's arrangement has an option to have the first chorus of Miles Davis's solo played by your trumpet section, or as a solo, or just as improv. It lies right in that wheelhouse of grade 1.5. And then Top Dog by Greg Yazinitsky, another one. This one's a little brighter, but it really works well for the beginning of the year. Favorite go-to charts for the middle and end of the year for beginning groups. El Mercado de Groove by Mike Dana. This is marketed as a beginning piece, but it's an A flat, so maybe not, but it works second half of the year as long as you're hitting A flat concert with your kids. And this is based on the Groove Merchant, Jerome Richardson tune that was made popular by the Thad Jones Mel Lewis Jazz Orchestra. But Mike does a real funky, playable version of this. It's a lot of fun. Caraco Blue by Zach Smith, another great bossa. I heard this one a lot at jazz festivals this year. It works so well for young musicians. Zach's Sideways Walking Dog is another one, great funk tune. It's a little lengthy, but it works wonderfully because it's very, very repetitious, and the kids love it because they can sound great on it immediately. Alligator Boogaloo, Terry White did a great job with this Lou Donaldson funky blues number from the 1960s. Dean Sorensen's Big Sky is probably one that it's one of my favorite charts for young jazz ensembles, like the second half of the year. It has colors in it that we don't normally get. It's inspired by Maria Schneider's writing, if you're familiar with Maria Schneider, and Dean gets these different sonorities and colors out of the young jazz ensemble that's quite unique, and it's a fun chart to play. Kids love it. Steep and Deep, and a great funk chart by Jeff Jarvis. This one's got a lot of repetitious riff type based horn lines. It sounds more difficult than it is, and kids love it. Mike Dana's Song for Orpheus. This is another good one. This is probably pushing it for the end of the year, but it's a great minor key bossa nova. Paul Murtha's chart on Sidewinder. Again, we talked about Sidewinder with the Bubbert chart on the last slide, but this 2 slides ago. But this is a great one. Great playable chart. Mike Story's Cubano Chant. If you've got a piano player that you want to show off, this is a good one. There's a lot of interplay between the piano and the ensemble. Como Te Va by Carl Stroman, another one that's just like in that pocket, works great for young musicians. Only Trust Your Heart, a bossa by Benny Carter. Terry White did this great chart on it. So in our chat, it's not in the chat, it's it's in your chat. We listed some of these playlists. There's a QR code for, I came up with a playlist of grade 1.5, grade 0.5 through 1.5, and then a grade 2 to 2.5 playlist that I created for this presentation. So I'll leave this up on the screen for a minute. And it's also in the links. And then here is a MakeMusic Cloud playlist of grade 2, 2.5. I grab that. And then a few years ago, I put together a bunch of exercises that I was kind of just teaching on the fly to my students. And it's called, I put it into print form. and it's a free download on my website. It's called Effective Warm-Ups for Developing Jazz Ensemble. It's a scripted way to teach, to get students to understand articulation and to hear, 4 and 5 note voicing chords. And also it gives you some springboard to teach call and response to your students as well, so they get the oral skills down. There are color instrument parts on my website at MikeKamuf.com. If you go to the free resources page, this file is there, but the color instrument parts are separate files, and they're on my website. And if you'd like to contact me, I'm just MikeKamuf@gmail.com, or you can check out my website, MikeKamuf.com. I have that free resources tab with other things up there too as well.